Hello. Hello, SNU, I keep wanting to say SNC, SNU MFA-IA community, students, faculty, alumnux, folks, friends. Thanks for joining us for this wonderful treat we're about to receive. I'm just going to bet on that. Tonight we have Walter's back to speak with us about his work and about his practice. And we're grateful to have Walter speak as the penultimate, the second to last visiting artist in our visiting artist lecture series for this winter residency 2021. We have welcomed Walter in the past as a visiting artist and as a visiting faculty member and as a mentor, as community member. So we're all really excited to hear from him again. Nice to see some of our other visiting faculty friends in the audience. I'm going to just do a little reading rainbow. I see Samir, I see Rob, I see other folks, I see Elizabeth. So thanks to all of you for being here, for joining us. Yeah, I don't want to take any more time. Anza, are you going to introduce Walter, or are we having a student introduction tonight?
Erin will be doing Walter's introduction.
Oh, wonderful. Erin Cross, I will introduce you. You're up.
Hello, everyone. Welcome, my fellow artists and all of our esteemed guests here today. I am actually very excited to introduce you all today to the awesome artist Walter Kitundu. Always inventive and sometimes humorous, he engages with an expansive list of media, including kinetic sculpture, musical and theatrical composition, wildlife and bird photography, instrument building and sound art, woodworking, graphic art, public art, installation art, interactive sculpture, performance, you name it, he killed it. Born in Minnesota, spending his early years in Tanzania, where his father's from, he moved back to the United States and then to San Francisco, where he lived for many years. He's now based in Chicago with his awesome wife and super sweet and smart child, who I got to meet over Zoom a couple times. He teaches at the School of the Art Institute in Chicago, and he's also taught at Northwestern University, California College of the Arts. He's been a raptor researcher at the Golden Gate Raptor Observatory. He's performed at the San Francisco Jazz Festival, the Walker Arts Center, and Carnegie Hall. His work has been exhibited internationally, from New Zealand to Tbilisi, Georgia, to Venice, to Iceland, to Singapore. He's the inventor of the instrument, the phonoharp, a musical instrument which turns a record player into a stringed instrument. And when he invented that, he got attention from the Kronos Quartet, who hired him as the instrument builder in residence in San Francisco. My favorite of his instruments is the Ocean Edge device he made at Headlands in San Francisco. He won the prestigious MacArthur Fellowship in 2008, which is only granted to 20 to 30 people who've exhibited extraordinary originality and dedication in their creative pursuits and a marked capacity for self-direction. He was the only winner in San Francisco that year. He has since created stunning public art commissions, site-specific installations, and even more inventive instruments. He was awarded 2 Rockefeller Map Fund grants in 2018 for his work in 2 different collaborative projects. He's currently working with the Magma and Ohlone tribes. He's taken a solo motorcycle journey from Chicago to the Arctic Ocean in Alaska and back. He recently founded Kitundu Studio in Chicago, where he works, and he truly considers all other beings in his works. He never overlooks any animal. He's attentive to the tides, the winds, temperature, and light, even collaborating with volcanoes and earthquakes, engaging with different phenomena in the most creative and brilliant ways. He's basically the coolest person you can imagine, and I was thrilled to be paired with him as my mentor this past fall. He was immediately brilliant, invested, and honest, and conversations with him has been fundamental in my growth as an artist during this wild time to be a maker. So without further ado, I will treat you all to Walter Kitundu.
Thank you, Erin. I'm tired after that introduction. Thank you. It's not very often you get to hear the last 20 or 30 years of your life encapsulated in 2 or 3 minutes. At least sort of the public/performative spaces. But I'm really honored to be here. I'm going to share my screen right away, and then we can continue on. Let me get that going. All right. So, yeah, it's really nice to be here. It's been, I was gonna say it's been a week, but it's been like a 3 month, it's been a year. Um, I'm really honored to be invited back into this community. It's really, hang on one second. I think I have one technical issue that I've got to solve before we keep going. Pardon the issue. This is just something I overlooked during our pre-show check.
I'm going to jump in super quick while you do that.
Yeah, please, please.
I forgot to do our land acknowledgement, which I like to do at the beginning of all of our public events. And I know that we're all virtual and all in different places, but I do root us kind of in our locale that is Sierra Nevada University, which is in Incline Village, Nevada, on traditional Washoe land. The Washoe people have lived, stewarded, and thrived on this land long before the university was there and will continue to do so long after. So we pay our respects to the, oh my gosh, whew, sorry, getting nervous because I wanted to get it in there. We pay our respects to the Washoe people and thank them for their work. So thank you. And I'll hand it back to you, Walter, whenever you're ready.
All right, thank you. So I just wanted to say that it is a real honor to be part of this community and to be able to play any role and contribute to the program. I've really wanted to be there in the past, and I'm hoping post-pandemic that that'll be able to happen again. I wish we could be together tonight, but I think and hope that we'll be able to see our way through to a time when we can share space safely once again. One thing I don't want to do is gloss over or diminish the impact and mental space that an insurrection and the looming threat of further white supremacist violence can take up in our consciousness. So I do hope that spending a little time sharing ideas, asking questions, responding to the world around us can offer some fuel for our path forward. So I know that we're of multiple minds at the moment. I know I am. So even if we just provide a place to rest our minds, if I can offer that, exercise a part of our brain and heart that isn't driven by stress, or just take a moment to sit with something joyful, I don't think it will ever not be worth it to find these sort of creative spaces together. I'm going to go over some of my past work. I know a few of you have seen me talk about these earlier pieces, but I want to create a frame for a more patient presentation of the two major pieces that I'm working on at the moment. So I grew up in East Africa, as Aaron said, in Tanzania. I've been drawing my whole life, but I didn't have really any formal training in music or woodworking or electronics or any of the things that I actually ended up doing. I did have an established background in trying things, and I was fortunate that those attempts resonated with people and gave me the chance to try more things. I felt like a very natural progression, growing like branches from some initial ideas, and each branch was a new path that gave me more to be inspired by, made me ask new questions and pursue more interests. So I think some of the paths that we take creatively can seem convoluted or unrelated to the things that we think we ought to be working on, but I think be careful judging them prematurely. Your creativity isn't necessarily bound by your intentions. So it can surprise you, and I think it needs to be respected and listened to. If you think you're being distracted, ask yourself why, and consider how what you think of as being off task might actually relate to or feed into your goals. I got into music in the early 90s through hip hop. I was really drawn to turntables and I became a DJ. and I played with a live band called MMF in Minneapolis. It was a really formative time for me musically because I tried to make the turntable transparent and play solo instruments or effects on the record and try to make it feel like I was just another instrument or a voice on the stage. But playing with musicians made me want to hit or pluck something. So I hit the turntable with chopsticks and I ended up playing it like a drum. Records are these really wonderful ways of storing vibration, storing sound information, but they're physical objects, so they also transmit vibration. So I began to use the record as a direct means for sending vibrations into the stylus, and the turntable would then amplify what I did. So it was at this point that I learned that turntables would also amplify notes and melodic material. I placed a tin can on the cartridge, and when I struck it, I actually heard a pitch come through. And that moment proved to be the beginning of years of investigation and inquiry. I asked many, many questions of the turntable, and the language of those questions ended up being a sculptural language. I mean, like, how do you talk to an object? How do you frame your questions? I ended up physically building my questions so that I could find the answers. On the question of how to talk to an object, I mean, now we talk to our phones and smart speakers, but this was well before that. And I'm reminded of an artist named Kelly Dobson who made a blender that you could talk to, but you had to talk to it in blender language, growling and making whirring sounds at it. And I think the goal was that you would build empathy for the machine and develop a kind of personally meaningful relationship with it. Super memorable piece. After experimenting with a bunch of smaller stringed instruments that I used with the turntable, I ended up building a turntable and incorporating the strings into it. People have tried to shield turntables from vibrations since they were invented because they're so sensitive to it. So generally this was considered a problem, but in my case, it was an answer. It was sort of a way into asking more questions. I ended up building the first of my phonoharps in 2001. This instrument had 26 strings that radiated from the body of the turntable, and the lower frequencies reached the needle pretty directly, but the higher tones were helped out by an internal contact mic. The experience of building this instrument gave me a newfound understanding that building things, changing the physical world around me wasn't as complicated as I'd imagined it would be. I had some image of what it meant to build something, and when I took these two pieces of wood and measured them and put them together and they fit, it sort of, it was almost a little bit miraculous, figuring out that building something was as simple as taking two things and putting them together, fastening them, reflecting, taking more time, and keeping going. It taught me that the distance between imagination and reality was navigable, that it just takes a little bit of time and energy to get from an idea to a thing that you have to reckon with. I've reflected with students before that the hard work is really just in starting. I think we all have brilliant ideas and we carry them with us. And once you sort of get over that initial friction of beginning, the rest is just moving things around, just time, energy, and reflection. And then you get to move through that idea and see how it lives in the world. The scholar Hubert Diassi talks about having a conversation with your materials. And I think that's critical to learning. It's critical to developing a vocabulary. And it's also how I learn about nature. You know, you listen, you wonder something, you ask about it, and then you listen for a response. And you just go through that cycle over and over again and get into the language, get into the dialogue, and begin to learn. So I started to build lots and lots of instruments, one every 3 months or so for several years. I'd have this idea, an inkling about a new instrument, and then I'd build it, and then I'd have to learn how to play it. This is inspired by sarangi, an Indian bowed instrument with a lot of different strings underneath that bridge that are sympathetic strings that resonate when the main strings are bowed. So this sort of turntable stringed instrument investigation, I mean, I call it an investigation because it's a way of deepening my understanding with the world. And this kind of work is informed by the kind of adaptive reuse that I've seen and that is found in places all over the world where resources are scarce. You can draw a straight line from that scarcity to colonialism and the harms that resulted in establishing those inequities, but the level of like artistry and improvisation and material intelligence that's found in those places is without equal, and it's inspiring to me. I just wish that people were never forced into scenarios where a kind of sculptural improvisation is a mechanism for their survival. These instruments, they were also driven by a real sense that my imagination was worth taking seriously. And I'd ask all of you to do the same, to take your imagination seriously, to put some respect on it. You know, don't limit yourself internally because the world is full of limits. Your materials will behave in a certain way and impose limits. Your society will try to impose limits. Your bank account will offer limits, but internally, I mean, if you stop yourself internally, you're encroaching on a gloriously free creative space. So I think it's okay to come up with things that don't seem possible, because the mere idea of a thing is the beginning of its possibility. So either inside your head or inside your studio or inside your sketchbook, you should aspire to be completely open to the demands of your imagination. Deal with the constraints of the world externally as you need to, but be as free as you possibly can inside. I think that's how we generate work that begins to challenge constraints. And I think we all should develop the habit of challenging limits in the pursuit of beauty, however you might define that. And this, I'm not saying this as something that I've accomplished. It's a practice. It's a daily practice. Here's one more of the phono harps, the turntable harps, just so you can get a sense of some of the musical possibilities. I've tried to limit the number of videos that I'm sharing tonight because we're online, and I'm hoping the sound and video make it through okay. So the thing about records is you magnify the grooves of a record and you've got mountain ranges, you've got valleys. It's a physical object. You drive it with movement to create physical vibrations that then are amplified and move your eardrum. It's a physical mechanical system. And it led me to take notice of other systems, and including those in the natural world around me. I think artistically, a key part of my approach to working with nature is to surrender control, to allow the natural world in as a collaborator on its own terms. So it means setting up parameters and inviting a kind of conversation, but not ultimately knowing the outcome. The natural world it's complicated. It has a deep rhythm and established patterns, but it's always somehow unpredictable. My mentor and friend Carrie Thomas called it ever-changingly fresh, like a waterfall or a fire, like really steady, kind of predictable, but never the same. And I think that's the reason we can stare at them for hours. It's a little bit like a bird who returns to the same perch every day, but is always open to the demands of each moment. It has a kind of established rhythm that's shaped by its environment, but it can step out of those rhythms in a millisecond, whether it's to grab prey or to evade a predator or for some other reason. They have these really established rhythms, practiced rhythms, but they're not restrictive. And I think improvisers of any stripe would understand that. Anyway, I've learned a lot from birds, and it was kind of natural that my sculptural work would be informed by all that time outdoors in the elements with the birds. This is a young female Cooper's hawk who I followed into a grove of trees after she'd been chased by some siblings, and this was her telling her little brothers to back off. And this is a red-tailed hawk and a pocket gopher that it had just plucked out of the ground and allowed me to kind of get really close to take this photograph. This bird was one that I actually got to know that lived in San Francisco, that decided that I wasn't a threat. And I ended up spending about 7 months following this bird around and photographing her transition from a juvenile bird into an adult. It was a pretty privileged relationship to have with a wild being. So you begin to think about natural systems and you realize that they're all about energy, exchanges in energy. The sun, wind, storms, migrations. It's about finding balance by moving energy or finding resources to sustain it. So it made sense that somebody obsessed with turntables, that I should try to tap into that by building instruments that could be part of this larger conversation. So this was a wind-powered turntable that I built out of some recycled materials. Here's a fire-powered turntable in the upper left with the candles, and a balloon-powered record player, both played with this glove that I built that has a needle on each finger. You can play the record like this as you're controlling the elements that are powering it. And after dealing with particular elements, I began to feel the need to consider how to interact with larger systems of energy. I wanted to partner with forces that were greater than myself and with beings that had some free will. So I created this piece at the Luggage Store Gallery in San Francisco. They basically invited me to do a month-long exhibition, and I asked them if I could remove the windows to Market Street, the main street downtown, and invite pigeons into the gallery. And to my surprise, they said yes. So I ended up building this structure, and we removed those windows, and it allowed the pigeons to come inside, and they were sheltered from the gallery visitors. You could only see them through these little like apartment door peepholes. So they could come in, be comfortable, and all the ledges inside were weight sensitive. So when the birds would land, they would trigger turntables and sound elements in the gallery. It demanded patience because the pigeons work on their own schedule. It took about 2 weeks for the thing to actually come to life. So there was a big lesson in thinking about how it is that natural systems shift and what that pace is. It doesn't really match up with the pace of an art opening. And then when we were done with the piece, we shut it down. And for 2 weeks after we deinstalled the piece, the pigeons would come to the windowsill every day at about 1 in the afternoon and hang out for a little while. And for me, that was really the piece. After the fact, I realized that we sort of made this impression into the natural world. And when we stepped back, it remained. When the birds, their behavior was changed and they were moving in relation to this volley, this conversation, this statement, this question that I asked of them. From the pigeons, I moved on to the sea. This was built for a performance at the Headland Center for the Arts. This is the Ocean Edge device that Aaron was referring to. It was my first attempt at a work where the forces were larger than my individual ability to manage them. So I asked the materials to help me, and I built a device that would safely take me to the ocean's edge and make music while we did it. The thing that I hadn't anticipated was that the world would make space for my idea. The audience members who jumped in to study the work, the people who volunteered to transport the instrument, people who appeared out of the blue to help make the piece possible. It was really the first piece I ever did that was bigger than me, and it was the idea, it was the story within the work that helped to move people to participate, to bring the piece to life. Something I was really grateful for, and it was a really good lesson that you don't necessarily have to be able to carry the work by yourself in order for it to live. That's what I'd done up until that point, so it was a good lesson. Here's another quick water piece that I made for a commission in Del Rio, Texas, along the San Felipe Creek. That creek flooded in 1998, killing several people. And the person who lives on this property commissioned me to create a memorial, not necessarily for the people that had died from the flood that were on the record, but the people who were not on the record. It's a border community, and his feeling was that there were quite a few people that weren't recorded who perished, who were undocumented, who happened to be in the area, and so he wanted to make a memorial for them. And so I wanted to find a way to find the breath in the water, to use the energy of the stream somehow to breathe into organ pipes and sing something for the lost. So I proposed this piece and ended up building this sculptural piece that uses the energy of the water to inflate a couple of bellows. And when those bellows reach the top, they're released and they exhale out through organ pipes and sing kind of a mournful cry. And the piece itself was installed actually quite close to a road. So people who were walking by could engage with the work. And this was installed about 3 years ago. Now I think I'd like to shift a little bit and talk about my latest project, since I'm concentrating on developing some large-scale public artworks. This image is an early public art piece that I made in 2011. It was commissioned by the San Francisco Arts Commission. It's a 26-foot long mural made of photographs that I'd taken of birds around the Bay Area. It's all plywood, different veneered plywoods, and all cut out by hand, and then inlaid. So taking like a teak and a redwood plywood and cutting out the shapes and laying them over each other, and then inlaying this on this 26-foot long canvas. It's at the San Francisco Airport in Terminal 2. And it's in what was meant as a children's play area. So one of the things to notice is that that central bird, the secondaries on the wings are actually xylophone tines. So the bird is actually an instrument, and the benches in the foreground are also instruments. And they're tuned to the song of the golden-crowned sparrow. So if you play them in the right sequence, you can actually recreate the song of the golden-crowned sparrow. And they're all tuned so that you can play them together as a trio with the bird that's on the wall as well. So this was my first kind of foray into public art through the Arts Commission, which was a really, it was an eye-opening and a great experience. Also really challenging because I lost my father during the midst of the final few months of getting it built and installed. So that shaped my life in ways that I won't necessarily go into in this conversation. But I was fortunate, after the first time I came to this program and participated, I was invited to propose for a project for the new Alameda Creek Watershed Center in Sunol. And I proposed. I was invited to propose, and I did, and I ended up receiving the commission. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about that, because I'm right in the process of making it right now. And the pandemic has thrown a few wrenches into that, to be sure, as it has for, I think, a lot of us. But we're on the verge of beginning to fabricate this piece. So the work itself is meant to be a vessel for the vision and for the voices of members of the Muwekma tribe. The main visual component is this large steel golden eagle in this 30-foot wide plaza with its wings wrapped around 3 benches. And given the history of this particular site, that protective gesture is actually meant to extend to the land itself. At this location, which is near the Sunol Water Temple, north of San Jose, up at the top of Niles Canyon in the South Bay, when they were excavating the land for the building, they found remains and artifacts, ancestors of the Muwekma Ohlone. The tribe was brought in and worked with UC Berkeley and other agencies to oversee the archaeological process and manage the sort of cultural reclamation and the relocation of some of those who were below ground and their artifacts. So it's both an honor, but a deep responsibility that I feel to create a work that sits on this sacred ground and addresses what the earth holds and what it means for the tribe today and into the future. Below the archive, I've designed an archive as an invitation to the tribe to safely and permanently return objects to the land, but I'll talk a little bit more about the archive later. In the wings and the tail, as I said, representing the people's vision, are glass panels that'll be printed with transparent images that are gathered from the surrounding watershed. And to represent the voices of the community, both human and greater than human, there's a sound installation in the garden that incorporates Chochenyo phrases in coded form, translating them into the songs and calls of the natural world. Chochenyo is the language of the Muwekma Ohlone people. I'm really grateful to them and to the leaders of the tribe who've been involved in this process for supporting this work and inviting me to collaborate with the community. So I think we'll get back to the eagle, but I think I'll start with how the sound installation, just to provide a little bit of clarity about how I'm going to use sound in a public artwork, which is not something that you see commonly. Language is critical to culture. It shapes the way we think. It shapes how we see the world. And I'm creating a Chochenyo-based sound work that plays from speakers throughout the garden. The content will be phrases sung in Chochenyo to the tune of local bird and animal calls that have been slowed down. When the phrases are then sped back up, they'll be heard throughout the garden in conversation with the sounds and the songs that are already present. This technique is inspired by the work of a UK artist named Marcus Coates. So I'm going to play you an example of this technique that I made for you in my native language, which is Kiswahili. The phrase I sang is "Asante kwa umakini wako," which means thank you for your attention. And when I play this, you'll understand you don't need to have a great voice for this to work. The process is really forgiving, and it's just something to demonstrate how we're going to build this sound installation. And you can really sing the animal songs the bird calls, when you slow them down, you can break them up into little bits and sing each one of them. And then we can stitch them back together in software and speed them up. And then we sort of regain the tenor of the call. But here's an example.
Asante kwa uma
So this process can be used with songs and calls of many different inhabitants of the watershed, which gives us a really wide range of voices with which to weave a story into the landscape. I'll be hosting several song sharing circles where we'll choose the voices that we want to have playing in the garden. I'll slow down the field recordings, guide everyone through a process where we can learn and record the calls using Chochenyo words and phrases, trying to match the tones that we hear. And then when the recordings are sped up, they get transformed into this bird song, but with their own unique character. If you hear them side by side, you can tell there's a difference, but out of context in the landscape, you'd be hard pressed to tell the difference. And each voice, whether it's a goldfinch or a gray fox or a downy woodpecker, when they'll be played in the landscape, in the watershed garden, in the type of habitat where you might actually see them in the wild. So this image gives you a sense of where those speakers might be outside the interpretive center in the gardens. The installation is meant to be like a handshake with the existing sound in the gardens. It's not meant to dominate it. It's meant to feel like an extension of what's already there. So it's going to be very subtle. But I think that's really important for a sound-based work that's supposed to last for decades. I keep thinking, like, if I worked there for 10 years and I took my lunch break at 11:30 every day and I went outside, like I don't want to be able to predict where these calls are coming from and have a sense of like repetitiveness when it comes to the installation. So I've thought very carefully about how to overlap these things, have them go out of sequence, and have them be subtle enough so that they really do feel like just an extension of what's there, but an important extension of what's there. They're not meant to stand out. They're meant to be a part of the exterior soundscape. So that's the how of the sound installation, but I just wanted to tell you a little bit about why create a sound piece for this site and for a public art piece. I see the installation as one way to honor Indigenous relationships with the natural environment and to use language as a vehicle for that connection. I think their voices played in this context uphold Muwekma Ohlone ideas and ways of thinking as deeply site-specific, as appropriate to the landscape, and as central to this place as any other sound that is of this place. There were two speakers of Chochenyo who were interviewed in the 1920s, and those interviews aided in the revival of the language in recent decades. And those interviews happened to take place in the same area where this work is going to be. So it seems like a fitting tribute to be able to place the language into the land in this place. And quietly, I guess it's not that quietly because I'm announcing it to all of you now, but one of the dreams that I have about this particular piece is that sometimes birds, particularly goldfinches and white-crowned sparrows, they have pretty vast dialects. So they'll learn to mimic slight variations of their songs that they learn from their environment. So it might be possible that a sparrow foraging at the Alameda Creek Watershed Center might pick up the phrasing of a song that it hears. And that particular phrasing is going to be the result of the fact that it was sung in Chochenyo by a specific person in the community. And that bird could fly off singing that phrase to other birds as they travel to other landscapes and environments, even on their migrations. And I just love thinking of the language permeating the natural world in that way. So now we'll cycle back to the main visual element, which is the sculpture, the golden eagle, which is over 10 feet high and 18 feet wide. The eagle faces Tuxtec, which is more recently called Mount Diablo, which is almost due north from the Watershed Center. And it's inspired by the Muwekma Ohlone creation story. And it's positioned as a guardian with wings embracing and protecting the space below. The space below is home to 3 benches that are oriented to the cardinal directions in honor of traditional prayer in the Ohlone community. Once the plantings in the garden mature, the eagle is going to end up being tucked into the edge of like mixed evergreen forest, looking out over the oak savanna, which is similar to how they roll in the real world. One of the largest sort of breeding areas for golden eagles is only about 12 to 15 miles away from the site. So they are definitely in the watershed, and it makes a lot of sense that they're sort of thematically in this piece as well. In the wings and the tail are these glass panels over 1/2 inch thick, and they're going to be, they're both tempered and laminated. On sunny days, these glass panels with these images are going to project the color and texture of images from the watershed all over the site, which should be really beautiful. The plan was for those images to be gathered by the community on artist-led walks through the watershed, but given the pandemic and our current circumstances, the plan to meet in person just isn't tenable. So I've been working on working to create frameworks for gathering online with the community to shape elements of the project, to develop self-guided tours of areas in the watershed for gathering photographs for the glass, to organize song sharing circles online so that we can make the recordings for the sound installation. Like I've said, it's kind of a forgiving process. So even a voice memo recording on one side emailed can be adapted and turned into a recording for the piece. And generally just to have the voices and the vision of the community be realized and uplifted by not only by the artwork, but by the experience of helping to craft it. Right now we're planning on May of 2021 as the month for many of these sort of virtual and individually local activities. Now below the eagle itself, between the benches, I've proposed an archive. Once the sculpture is in place and before any official opening, members of the tribe will be invited to ceremonially place artifacts and contemporary items in the earth below, in this place where so many relatives and artifacts were recently removed. After the ceremony, we would replace the soil and seal the archive permanently, holding those items under the protection of the eagle. The cover would hold this single golden eagle feather in tribute to the Magma creation story that begins with a single feather floating on the water. That's where we're at right now with this project. We're about to start fabricating. I would have already been in the Bay Area meeting with people and going for walks had it not been for everything it's been for. But you know, we adapt and we make the best and move on, and hoping for some better progress, and I'm hoping everybody ends up feeling the kiss of a needle pretty soon, so we can all be vaccinated and move ahead. Right now, I just want to share a few words about another current project that I'm currently applying for funding to complete, because I like to complete the research and prototype kind of development phase of this work. That phase in and of itself might take 1.5 years, and the actual project could take anywhere from 2 to 3 years to 300, depending. It's not really up to me in the end, but the piece is called Geologic Sound Casting Project. It's a major sculptural installation to be developed for installation in one of Iceland's active volcanic regions. I plan to work with volcanologists to locate appropriate installation sites, collaborate with Icelandic artists to record stories and songs, engrave those into enormous records 10 feet in diameter, generate ceramic molds from those originals, and then install those molds in the landscape in anticipation of volcanic eruptions, which will inundate the sites with lava. And that will cast the recorded information into the cooling basalt, so that months later, when the sites have cooled, the stones can be excavated and installed on an enormous naturally powered turntable so the public can see and hear the resulting stories. And the stories would have been offered by Icelanders and co-authored by the lands on which they currently stand. I've been thinking about this project for about 1.5 decades, and about 1.5 years ago, I kind of realized that I might be in a position to step into it and make it real. So it's probably the longest germinating project that I've had, but it's starting to take shape now. The project takes its inspiration from the island itself. It's perched atop the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, and so it's subject to immense forces that are associated with the creation of new land. The island itself is shaped by calamitous events, floods, and eruptions, and Iceland's residents have always had to contend with and adapt to those natural forces. They've tapped into it, though. They've tapped into that energy to heat their homes, to power their cities. They've written their stories in partnership with the land. The history of Icelanders is told in epic poems known as the sagas. The long-held tradition of storytelling is alive and well in the authors, the artists, and the musicians of today. My aim is to partner with them to record new works encapsulating stories of both the present and the imagined future. And if we're going to write a story with a volcano, we might as well not limit ourselves to the expected future. We could imagine it as well and sort of weave that into our stories. I'm also going to reach out to volcanologists, to the National Power Company of Iceland that has an arts funding program, and they fund work that contributes to Icelandic culture, and hopefully this will in that way. These local partnerships will sort of help me to identify sites for the work and then facilitate the permitting process needed to access actively volcanic regions of the island. And then hopefully they'll generate out connections to possible exhibition spaces, media opportunities, educational connections via universities and schools. We're in the very beginning phases, but I would like this to end up being a project that is sort of upheld and taken on by the community. I'm planning to make connections in Iceland through site visits, to work with artisans in Chicago, to explore, refine, and develop working prototypes for each step of the installation. And some of those steps will include, this is sort of like the mental map that I have of the project going forward: research into Icelandic storytelling traditions and their role in contemporary culture, assembling a team of artists and collaborators to help shape the arc of the storytelling project, because that in and of itself is its own piece. I'd like to develop an educational tool that weaves together history, geology, contemporary craft, and an overview of audio recording technology and reproduction, from analog stuff to optical stuff and everything in between. And then we need to identify software and processing that's going to be needed to translate the recorded story audio into instructions, which can then be used by CNC routers and 3D printers to physically encode the sonic information at the scale that we're going to need for it to be read after it's been cast by a wall of lava. So to that end, we also need to identify the best materials for creating those ceramic molds that will be capable of withstanding the intense temperatures in the volcanic environments. And we need to invent systems which can then recover those sounds and play those newly cast stone records. And each one of these steps that I'm telling you is jumping over like 17 or 70 steps in between to get from one to the next, and all the other sort of aspects of this project, which is what excites me right now, is because every time I turn a corner, there's another challenge, there's another thing that maybe says that this isn't possible. But I haven't run into anything that's definitively stopped me yet in the last decade and a half. So I'm just moving ahead, because I think we can actually do this. And then in the end, I need to develop sustainable ways to actually exhibit the final works by tapping into like geothermal or other natural forces. And I'd love to have them be on the street, available for people to sort of walk up to and either push with their hands, or, and then they could be sustained by steam or something. Like find a way to really make it accessible to the public. The work itself demands that we look way ahead, because I have to invent all these new techniques and technologies in collaboration with people in order to achieve what's actually a fairly ancient result. It's simultaneously like it reaches forward toward the limits of technical possibility, and hopefully it's going to challenge some assumptions in the physical arts and sciences, just the whole process of making it happen, whether or not it's even worth putting that kind of energy into, because we live in a world with a lot of pretty astounding and pressing problems. And the piece itself is going to be looking into the future, like I said, but also grounded in the past, because we're basically aiming to cast a boulder, a rock, and encode it with a texture that carries the songs and stories of the island's residents. So it's kind of a leap ahead into the past, a dialogue with the island itself. And after that opening statement, after we create the pieces, we install them, we just have to wait. And it could be years. It could be the next day, but it also could be years. It's like Earth's improvisation. Like it will respond to the demands of the moment. And that's another part of the piece. Another chapter is like stage 1 through 7 are getting the pieces in place. And then the next stage is just waiting. And I think our ancestors did that. We had to wait for the seasons to change. We had to wait for the rains. And I think we need to sort of step back from any sense of entitlement we have that somehow the work or the planet or the pigeons are beholden to us in terms of giving us their response. So that's a big part of why I like to do work like this, because you need to kind of let go and then listen. Yeah, you offer the question and then listen. And I think, like, most importantly for me, the thing that has made me not let go of this work is because I want to use the experience of creating the Geologic Soundcasting Project to shape future work in north central Tanzania, in Hawaii, in other volcanically active regions internationally where indigenous voices can be centered and celebrated in conversation with the geologic forces that are underfoot. In some ways, for me, the Iceland project it's a testing ground to develop the methods and the means to make this project happen in other parts of the world. There's some pretty big questions ahead. And now, instead of asking a turntable or a flock of pigeons, I'm asking the planet to participate in telling a set of stories. And I'm asking those people who are interested in the project to help me find new ways to listen for the answers. Like I said, it's in its very early stages. I've been thinking about it for about 14 years. I'm super happy to take questions about it tonight. I think that's all I'm going to cover. So we have some time for Q&A and we can get into some things. So we can just talk from now on. Thank you all for your attention.
Yay!
Oh, let me open up the chat.
So feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question, or you can pop it into the chat and we can take it from there.
Can I start? Because I have questions. I know that's a big surprise to anybody who's ever met me. I'm really curious, Walter.
Hey, friend.
Hey, it's so good to hear your ideas at a time when, like, it's so dark and, like, so many things can feel like they're closing in. But I'm wondering about the ability, and I know this is something that I've noticed each time you've spoken, for having faith in a project that takes 14 years to even get to the stage of, like, getting funding for it. Of, like, what is your advice for thinking in terms of big projects and then not letting go of them? Or are there other ones that you do let go of and that's okay to kind of let go of those expectations and just see which ones stick?
I think you have to trust yourself. In a way, this project hasn't let go of me. You know, once I thought of it, I've been carrying it around. It's aspirational in the sense because the setting that I have to place myself in, the conversations that I have to have, the way I have to kind of move through the world to make it happen is something that I want to be that person, you know. So so the work for me is it's like a key to growth, and it's also kind of exciting, and it's been in my pocket, and I feel like it's necessary at some point, and I think that process is also going to lead to a lot of other things. There are projects that I've let go of because sometimes the initial excitement over something is big, is high, and then you realize that perhaps it didn't have the depth that you might have been hoping for. But you know, recently I had a project, I think I spoke about it briefly last time, where I wanted to get ancient air. I wanted to get old air into awards, into the handheld awards that we were giving to mayors who were championing the fight against climate change. And so I was commissioned to create these awards, and I wanted to find air from ice cores from Antarctica or other places and then get it into these awards and be able to hand it to them so that they have a little bubble of air from before the Industrial Revolution. And when I talked to a scientist about it, the scientist told me, "You're wasting your time. You should do all these other things. I don't want to be associated with someone who might be making false claims." And at that point, like speaking to a world-renowned scientist, I probably should have said, "Oh, thanks for the advice," and backed off, but I didn't. I sort of couldn't. And as luck would have it, as persistence would have it, I ended up working with another scientist who was completely open, very interested in solving the problems, and not didn't diminish my idea in any way. And instead of stopping, I sort of moved on and found this person, and then the piece came to life. And 3 weeks later, I was holding air in my hand that was 12,000 years old. So I don't know that I have any like special ability to know when to let something go or to push through that, because you don't want to hold on to ideas in the face of like blinding expertise that might be trying to guide you well. But I think if someone doesn't give you like a viable like reason, I think the key is finding good collaborators, finding people who think about who move through the world with an air of possibility. And like I said, the constraints are going to be there. And in terms of like checking back in with an idea that I've had for a long time, I can't tell you why I decided to step back into it and start working with it. It's like if you're going to draw a curved line on a piece of paper, there's a certain point at which you know that the curve is right, and you can't articulate why that particular curve is the right curve. It could be influenced by what you had for breakfast, or a bird that landed on your windowsill or something. There's so many incalculable elements to like trusting your artistic instincts and moving forward. I just feel like I've been fortunate in that the things I've been able to pursue have yielded results, and I feel really grateful to be in a position to keep imagining these things and trying to make them happen.
Thanks.
Definitely, I saw another question related to it. It is definitely helpful to talk to people, make sketches, think about it, keep it in your mind. Yeah, holding ideas inside for a long time is it's either brilliant or terrible depending on your process, your character, so what you need. Should I just wait for the questions to be moderated, or should I read into the chat and try to answer? What do you think is the best way?
Whatever you would like to do. I'm happy to read them out to you if you want to just focus on answering
Sure.
them.
That might be helpful also for the people who are listening. Thank you. We
have an earlier question, which was, what's the scale of the records cast in Magma?
Oh, right now that's a little bit yet to be determined. Right now I'm anticipating they're going to be at about 10 feet across. And that means the grooves are going to be, they may be an inch deep or an inch wide, or maybe even bigger. One of the things that you encounter when you're building actual records is you're working on such a small scale that when the grooves get bigger, you introduce a lot of noise. And so there's a question as to whether I can ramp up this sort of microscopic analog system into this sort of chunky record that weighs as much of a car and have it still be playable. So I have to think about and figure out how to make the systems that can recover the sound from that. And I'm really committed to staying analog. I want to make it analog, but I'm not going to hold on to that for dear life and not be able to do the project just because I wasn't down with creating a system that could be then read optically or something. It's still going to be cast by a volcano. So I mean, that's pretty, I think I would be happy with that. So I'm going to push as much as possible to create an analog system to be able to play it back. And then it's part of the conversation. I'm going to learn. The piece is going to tell me where to go next, and we'll keep going.
I'm going to read some questions from the chat. If anyone who typed them in wants to ask them yourself, feel free to jump in. You answered, Rachel. So Cassandra, I don't know how to pronounce your name. Dancer here, who has been watching many powwows and trying to distinguish music with dance vocabulary. I would love to learn the dances for vocabulary, but do not want to offend a tribe, the people, the history, etc. How did you approach permission, etc.? Native land, Haiti, Taino Nation.
Well, I mean, I think conversation is key. You have to, be sincere in your intention, and helps to do some research and have honest conversations. I was invited to propose for this piece, and I've been thinking about issues related to this piece, and thinking about my own origins in East Africa, and thinking about what it means to be an Indigenous African, and is that term sort of applicable internationally? And there's some scholarship about that, but thinking about my dad's village and where I grew up and my lack of connection to that place, and here I am now, sort of entrusted with this really important opportunity to sort of honor and make sense of all the elements that are present in this particular site. I just tried to be as sort of human and decent as I knew how to be, and ask questions when I ran into spaces that I didn't understand. And I'm still in that zone. I think also be prepared to hear that somebody might be uncomfortable with a direction that you want to take. I mean, we that's why we have these conversations, to understand like where those spaces are and what it means to create something that's an homage, or to create something that appropriates. I think you just have to be really open to the truth, and the best way to do that is through honest conversations with the people that you're engaging. I hope that's helpful.
I may not have good, connection, but thank you. That's why I typed it in. So thank you for that.
My pleasure. Thank you for the question.
Question from Sarah. It seems as though one of the primary forms of your work is monument. Can you talk a little bit about monuments in general, your thoughts on them?
I mean, it's sort of a hot topic at the moment with monuments being removed, and like, what does it even mean to build a monument? I mean, this is sort of where I'm at right now, but it's not necessarily. Well, I'll just talk to you a little bit about my personal, like how I arrived here. Ever since my father died in 2011, and then in 2016 I lost my mother. Through that sort of span of time and beyond, I've started making a bunch of memorials, and particularly early on after my mother passed, I'd be asked to do a commission or do a work, and I would build it, and I'd look at it and go, that's a memorial. And I think I was just dealing with issues of loss and remembrance, and like what it means to use like those memories and those emotions to move forward in a constructive way. And I think I was emerging from that when I landed at this commission into like thinking from a place of joy. Like, how do you use that energy? How do you use those sort of deep emotional feelings and move them forward in a joyful way that's both holds the weight of those memories, but can also like move forward in a celebratory way. I credit a lot of that to my daughter, who just turned 5, being in my life and sort of shaping the energies around me. I admit I want to do more thinking about what it means to be making monuments today. I think for me, the translation from memorial, stepping back and realize like I am building these monuments. I think they have to live and be sort of in conversation and connection to the present, and they have to be kind of forward thinking in order to have a kind of relevance. Just given the state of conversation about how many monuments have been put up in the past, what their intention was, how that may or may not have shifted, how they're being used now to shape particular conversations, to disenfranchise people, to it's a really deep topic. And I feel like your question reminds me that I'm sort of in chapter 1 of of the book. I'm trying to get into that conversation myself.
Dennis, do you want to ask your question?
Thank you.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. Greetings. Nice to meet you, and thanks for the talk. I really appreciate it. There's some connections I had from your talk. But one thing that I look at, my previous job was as an Army trumpet player in the U.S. Army. That was redundant. Anyways, and I get intrigued by what sparks an idea, why someone starts something, and I definitely relate to that challenge of starting something. And so I'm wondering what sparked you to get into your fascination with birds?
I have to credit my grandmother with that. She gave me a book on birds when I lived in Tanzania when I think I was 5 or 6, and it was this hardcover kind of only one volume, but a bit encyclopedic about bird anatomy and nesting and plumage and all these things. It was really beautifully illustrated, and I just remember having that book in every room that I ever had up until I think junior high or high school. Like it just was part of my surroundings, and I didn't necessarily become bird obsessed or anything at the time. I was just interested in it, and then something happened to the book. It was in a box somewhere in an attic somewhere. I moved on, went to school, lived my life, and when I went to, I had a residency in Iceland, and I was given a camera to borrow to take pictures, and I took pictures of the things that were around me. I had some mission to take pictures of doorknobs and fence posts and like all the things that you interact with but never take a photo of, but they're the things that you live with when you travel. But when I got back from Iceland, I still had it, and I was in San Francisco, and I worked near this lagoon, and these gulls were taking baths, and I started to try to take their picture so I could freeze their wing shapes because I wanted to see the shapes of birds. And I would do that every time I was on a break. I'd take the camera out there, and then a hummingbird would fly by, and I photographed that, and then a heron would walk by, and I'd take pictures of that. And right at that moment, a dear friend of mine gave me a book on birds of Northern California. And so there's this book in my youth that was given to me. And then as an adult, another person gave me a book, and it just sort of unlocked, it kind of cracked open this interest that became, that then sort of snowballed and became kind of an obsession, and really sort of an escape too. I was learning a lot from the birds. They would teach me a lot of things retroactively, like I'd sit with a hawk for 3 hours and then it would fly away. And then I would wonder why it flew away, and then recognize that the light just changed a little bit, or like the air temperature shifted. So like retroactively, the birds started to teach me what to pay attention to. But then it just became a place that I would go to process and learn. And anytime there was a sort of a heavy deadline coming up, I really needed to be doing the work, I would find myself in a field somewhere or on a cliff in San Francisco, and sort of feeling tense about not doing the thing I was supposed to be doing, but also being sort of buoyed and taken care of by the fact that I was in that setting with the birds. And it became kind of a new balance. But yeah, never underestimate the power of gifts.
Indeed. Thank you.
Or books.
Or books, yeah. Thanks.
Hey, Walter, it's Chad here.
Hey,
Great
Chad.
to see you. How's it
Likewise.
going?
Good.
Yeah,
General.
I'm just curious now that you're kind of delving deeply, and I must say it's amazing public art project that you're started. Just curious, like what you foresee, are you kind of heading down this public art way, and kind of how do you feel about that?
I feel good about it in terms of the growth that's like a part of the process of learning to deal with institutions and deal with budgets, and figuring out my studio and developing a kind of artistic practice that can also like feed me and contribute to my family. And in terms of being an artist and thinking about like what you need to do to sustain yourself, it's really helpful to focus on learning this particular skill of creating public art. It hasn't closed in my senses or sight with regard to my artistic practice. I may be at home, but I can't, working on this project, but I can't help looking out the window at every place I've ever seen a bird over the last 8 months. Or I'm also working on composing some work for a project that's happening, an aerial dance project that's happening at Grace Cathedral coming up soon. I'm sort of constantly interested in the creative endeavor, and I like that I've struck upon something that with work and good fortune, I think could also help support and sustain me like financially as well as creatively, because it's exciting work. But my goal is to have an art practice in my studio that's ongoing and just like the bird, kind of open to the demands of the creative moment. And that could be a project that I'm working on with my daughter, or it could be something of a much larger scale.
Thanks.
Hi, Walter. It's Jillian.
Hey.
Hey.
Everyone pops out of their little Zoom boxes. It's nice to see you.
Hey, I just had a quick question. With all these instruments that you make, do you have to like spend time like practicing? If you get like a gig or something that comes up, do you have to like brush off all your like, your skills, to be able to feel like you're bringing something to the performance? Or
yeah, I mean, I have to either brush them off or build them. A lot of times you build a new instrument and you have to figure out how to play it. And I have this really bad habit of I really like solving problems in 3 dimensions. I really like building things. I get into a mode in the shop where I'm not hungry, I'm not tired, I'm just working, and I just asking those little questions and getting answers and building. And I really prefer that to rehearsing. So oftentimes what'll happen is I get an invitation to play. I got 3 weeks. Instead of working on a bunch of music for it, I'll build an instrument for the show. And I usually get it done a few days, because I want to like try this new thing. And then I'll get it done a few days before the show. And then I have to like cram to get to know this thing. And then when the performance is like actually sort of a document of me getting to know the piece, with an audience. And often in my life and in my sort of performative career, it hasn't been about like me stepping on stage going like check this out, like I don't stroll up there being like, look what I have prepared for you. It's more like I get onto a stage and I sort of open a window into the process of like, this is where I'm at now, and like watch me go from here to the end of this 45 minutes or to the end of this hour. And like it's just sort of opening a window into the process of getting to know the instrument. And sometimes that works remarkably well. Other times I get off the stage and wish I would have spent more time rehearsing, because it can, you can run into all kinds of problems doing that. It's kind of risky. I've improvised a lot of shows, and when you're in practice, it feels really good to do that. And when you're not in practice, it's terrifying ahead of time, during, and sometimes after. So performing was a cause of a lot of like personal stress in my life. And so I had to kind of think like, do I want to keep stepping out and performing and making music, or do I want to do I just really like to build things and then learn how to play them? And maybe I can also build a recording and then share that too. I don't necessarily feel that like I'm on a stage getting fed by the audience thing, unless it's going really well. But it takes a certain kind of like preparation to do that.
Um,
yeah.
one last question. Thank you, Walter. First of all, you just anyways,
Likewise.
these instruments kind of have like a little bit of Afrofuturism, kind of a little bit of a vibe with that kind of nautical. I don't know, and I don't know if you had anybody that kind of if you drew some influence from some of the Afrofuturism art community. And lastly, the other quick question was, since these are kind of your instruments are also kind of obviously sculptural, do you find that they are just kind of like they just have their one song or one note kind of thing, like a bird has its own song?
Yeah, I think the ones that have lasted have multiple songs. They do have a voice. Some of them can use that voice in multiple ways and be used for a bunch of different sort of expressive things. The ones that really only have a song end up in limited rotation, or they end up getting pirated for other instruments that I build. It's that thing, some instruments just don't have that thing. And the ones that do, the ones that do get to stick around. In terms of Afrofuturism, I think there's probably some, indirect kind of filtering in from things that I've read or been around or noticed. It hasn't been like entirely conscious. I think when you asked that question, I was thinking like, I hope the futuristic Afro energy is actually, I hope I'm the futuristic Afro being in this equation. But I get the tenor of your question, and it wasn't like a direct like, oh, that's really interesting, and let me sort of channel it into this sort of approach. I think I've been inspired by a lot of West African music, a lot of jazz music, hip hop for sure. Birds, wind going through the trees in a certain way. Like it's hard for me to encapsulate the origins of the fuel that has driven those shapes. But somebody once asked me, like, how do you do the math? How do you get that shape? Like, how do you do the math to get that particular shape? And for me, it was as simple as like, you put a piece of wood out, and then you take your arm and you sweep your arm across it to where you think, you do something that feels good, and then you sort of mark that down, and then the instrument sort of starts to take proportion and take shape based on your own body and your own relationship with it. And then the issue with that is when you're done and you string it up and you get all the strings to sound the right way, it's its own thing. I didn't build the instrument so that note would turn out to be a C sharp. I built it in relation to this sort of analog self, and then when it comes out, it has a very particular voice and a particular tuning. So it becomes a little less convenient on the playing side, but also pretty interesting to get to know what a new instrument can do.
Thank you, Walter.
Thank you.
Hi, Walter. It's me, Alex.
Hey.
How are you?
Good to hear. I'm good. Good to hear from you.
Yeah. I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart for helping me on my sound for my thesis show.
That was my pleasure and my honor. It was really fun to work on those pieces.
Yeah.
So I'm sure we'll do something else together in the future.
Yes.
Yeah. Thanks so much. It turned out the exhibition and the work is really beautiful. So thanks for thinking of me.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, we've got 5 minutes left?
Exactly. I was just going to say we've got a couple more minutes for questions. If you've been holding them in your heart, now's the time.
If you're too shy to bring them up now, the the folks can give you my contact information, feel free to reach out and we can discuss things.
I have a question from someone else who's here, but is too shy to actually ask it for himself. So how, when you're finding music that you play with your instruments, for the records that you put with them, what are the things that you're looking for in the sounds of those records that work with the sounds of the instruments that you create? Did I ask that correctly?
Yeah, could you repeat the question? I'm sorry, I actually got distracted by the chat, so I'm listening. You have my undivided attention now.
Sorry. So the question was, like, in the instruments that you've created that have a record player as part of them, how do you think about the sounds that you want on the records to work against the sounds of what the instruments are making, and how to be able to play off of that? Like, what is?
Yeah, and does he hear? You hear things that are in certain records, and not just the songs, but some, you know, particular pieces of the noise within the grooves that you're like, oh, I gotta, you know, this is a perfect thing to use for pigeons. like how did that relationship between recorded music and the essence of what you're doing with live and you know, truly, like, again, like extendedly long lengthy, you know, live music, how do you match up that relationship, and what things are you looking for? How does that process work?
Right.
It's just a real simple question.
Yeah, super simple. Yeah, 30 seconds. I started off playing music in a hip hop context, and you know, there's a lot of sampling involved and taking bits and pieces from all over the place and putting them together and seeing what jumps off. And so, like, it gave me a real respect for like what can happen if you sort of cross these categorical boundaries and put things together, and you know, not have too much allegiance to certain ideas of tradition and things. So the turntable had that kind of like sample mentality. It's like I have a library of sounds to be able to pick from. And the way that I assembled music to write pieces, but also performed, was really like a collage where I would put down a layer, a rhythm. Maybe I played it on the turntable with some chopsticks, or maybe I sampled it off of a record, and then I would respond to that with the strings. And then I would, you know, add another sample, and then I would respond to that, and I would just be building and building. And by the time I was done, I had a piece that wasn't like predetermined, but it's almost like the thing that you build, like, shows you what you're capable of. Like, you get to reflect on the process, and you get to see like, oh, I made that and it sounds like that. But all I did was like think of it a layer at a time. And after a while, I started to understand like how to paint with those layers, like how to think about, you sort of learn what your layering is like, and then how records can play into how you build a composition. And I have one song where I have that central groove in a record where the needle gets to the end, and instead of going across the paper, it sits in that circular groove and just spins forever. I have a whale record that was inside of an old National Geographic, a plastic whale record, the central that I used masking tape and stuck onto an actual record. And then I would put the needle in that central groove, and then I would just let that play forever, and that became like the rhythm for that particular composition. So I think when you're dealing with building things and thinking about sound as material, you built the instrument, so you're dealing with material, like it all becomes material. Like the stuff on the record becomes material, the record itself becomes material. So you just sort of keep scratching and pushing and combining things until things spark, and then you sort of you record those. Yeah, that's been my process, and it's shifting as I grow.
It's really fascinating. Thank you.
We had one final question in the chat box, which is from Svea, who says, I'm wondering why you chose Iceland as the first site to trial your volcano project. Perhaps funding?
Yeah, I mean, it's a combination of things. I think initially it's because coming up as a young creative person, you know, it's as simple as like being really into the music of Björk, you know, Bjork, and thinking about Iceland, and then like really being interested in the place, and I'm thinking about the ocean in the Bay Area, and I'm thinking about working with water, I'm thinking about working with the elements, and then I'm thinking about Iceland and thinking of like how elements move around that place, and how the island is, you know, ripping itself apart at the growth of, I think, a fingernail. That's like the speed at which it creates new land. Its history. I started to really just get involved in that place, and then I got a residency in 2004 in the fall to actually go there and spend 5 weeks in eastern Iceland, to think about things and walk around for hours at a time with no one to talk to but like the sheep that were in the fields and stuff. So I got to really soak in a certain aspect of the place, and that sort of fascination and love for that place didn't really wane. And the idea was generated around that time and has stuck with me a long time. And so the idea was sort of born in relation to the island, to the people that I met, and to the possible access to make it happen. And then as I lived with the idea on and on, I realized, like, you know, there are other places where the earth is speaking, and there are other groups of people, particularly like the people that I come from in north central Tanzania, that I would like to, because I'm trying to re-engage and reconnect with my own history, because since my father passed, it feels like my connection and my link to my own past is tenuous. And so I'm trying to get over some hurdles. And so, you know, I don't have to do that with Iceland. I can sort of dive in and work on the project and think about how the project relates to the community there and learn a lot of things, while still being careful, but then to use those lessons and go to this place that's really personally dear to me, and be able to sort of execute this project in a way that means something, or that can contribute something. I just feel like I can do less harm on my first attempt. You know, I think it'll like be the spirit of the work will be taken up. I'll get the experience, and then I can move into situations where I want to move with greater care, but no less respect, and be able to execute those works in ways that are really meaningful.
Austin, are you going to ask your question? Can I read it?
I'm sorry, that I couldn't quite hear that.
Oh, I was asking Austin if he wanted to read the question. I'll read it for you. Piggybacking on Svea, are the volcanoes there? See, you go for it, Austin. It's all you.
Oh, I think you're freezing a
igneous.
little bit, Anza. Sorry. I wasn't sure if you were talking to me. Well, hey, Walter,
I see that.
put a question in the chat.
Hey, Austin.
Good to see you.
Yeah, I can read it. Are the volcanoes there igneous, explosive, or basaltic, flowy?
That's my geology
and the
101
material
understanding of volcanoes, but not any further.
I hear I hear you. We're on the same page. Those shifts would be really significant to mold making. Icelandic flows are basaltic. They're not like Mount St. Helensy. And I don't think there's going to be a B-side, but that's a great idea. Now I'm going to think about putting in a B-side. I don't know if they'll be able to flip them over, but that's a great idea. Thank you. I'll credit you.
You can have it.
But the chemical composition of the lava is going to dictate like the shape, the texture that it leaves behind. The rate at which it cools is going to dictate, you know, the sort of resolution that we end up getting. There's so many different like ways for this to go wrong, and about like, you know, like 3/4 of a way for it to go right. So I just keep like trying to like whinny things down to get to the point where we can actually get something that's readable. But in the end, if a volcano erupts, the piece is inundated, months go by, we excavate the boulder, we put a needle on it, and it doesn't sound, it just sounds like noise. That's going to be the noise of an eruption that like fulfilled the installation, which is, you know, going to be also great. But that being said, like all of my energy is being put into being able to create something recognizable out of that final piece. And so I've thought about having like giant water towers where the lava will burn through the legs and then they'll dump the water onto the thing to cool it. I saw some video of a wall of lava in Iceland moving forward, and it was like 18 feet tall, like this crackling wall of rock and like superheated rock with these little openings of bright lava hidden behind a shield of rock, just destroying everything in its path as it moved forward. And I was thinking, like, how do I put something in front of this without it being completely destroyed? And I came up with the idea of installing these pieces underground with roofs that would support the initial movement of the lava past. So all of that exposed, cooled lava passes over, and then it burns through the roof and all the fresh lava falls onto the piece. So like there's all kinds of problems to solve. And Iceland's lava content, I think, it's super challenging, but it's in the right mode of challenging for the project. The one in northern Tanzania erupts at a much lower temperature and it comes out like a black liquid. It's not even red hot, like it erupts black, and then it flows really watery, and then when it cools, it hardens, and then after about, I don't know if it's like 3 months or 6 months, it turns white and just falls apart. So yeah, anyway, I could keep going. I know we're running close on time.
I love it. Thank you.
Are there any, let's see, did you see Sarah Bird's last question, Walter, in the chat?
Yeah, I'll write it out. Skridu Kloster. I believe that is the spelling. It's the home of Gunnar Gunnarsson, an Icelandic writer and poet. It's in Eastern Iceland, and his home was transformed into a residency place. And I just sent them a letter years ago, cold, with some photocopies I made at Kinko's of my ideas. And then I forgot about it until I got a letter in the mail like 6 months later, and I just freaked out. So, and then called all my friends and family and tried to get enough money to get a plane ticket, because they would put you up for 5 weeks, but you had to get there and home on your own. So I managed to do that, and it was great.
Awesome. Let's hear it for writing letters. Are there any other questions for Walter before we wrap up the talk portion of tonight?
I have one last question. As far as music, are you able to hear me?
Yes.
In regards to the hip hop, in regards to your hip hop, I'm as old as hip hop, so I'm a big hip hop head, and I'm definitely one of these people who doesn't understand today's hip hop. So I'm curious, like, you know, a lot of us are hey, we're 90s, where, you know, when it was poetry, and then know the history of hip hop even before it was rap, you know what I mean? So I'm curious, does your future work stop with a certain time of hip hop? Because I honestly am trying to relate to the new hip hop, and I'm wondering if maybe your work will get me there.
I'm a 90s hip hop person myself. I'm like De La.
So like question, I guess, is hip hop for you. Where do you are you a 90s hip hop person? Do you feel like?
Yeah, I'm a 90s hip hop person for sure. You know, I sit with you know,
exactly, and
De La and Tribe, and you know, Eric B and Rakim, and you know, Gangstar, and like a whole bunch of folks from back then. You know, Pete Rock and Steel Smooth. Anyway, I think I sort of I feel like I've said this before, that I feel like I sort of came up in that, learned how to DJ in that, and then I took all my hip hop tools and I loaded them onto a boat.
Yeah.
And then I left the shores of hip hop to like try to explore other things, but I still had all my like hip hop, you know, and DJing arsenal sort of with me, my tools with me. And then I used those to kind of enter into, interpret, and move through other creative realms. So definitely like, you know, an old school head. I think right now I realize when I listen to contemporary, to hip hop, that I'm older, and that's okay. I try to think of it from the perspective of like young people like trying to express themselves in a world that is like increasingly getting like complicated, multi-layered, media influenced. Like there's so much going on. Everything is so demanding. Like everything is immediate, but everything also demands things from you now. Like you can't just practice and, you know, have your little shows for 2 years before you step out and like try to actually do something, because everything you've done has already been put up on YouTube and people have judged it. It's like so performative and difficult to sort of step out and really try. And I feel like that shapes the sort of expressions that come out. And so I feel really grateful that I came up in a time when everything wasn't recorded and I was able to have bad shows. I was able to try stuff out and fail and not have it be like, you know, the baggage that I carried forward all the time. And so I don't know exactly what it's like to be in that mode now as a young person trying to make hip hop. And so I'm trying not to judge it, and I'm trying to find a way into it and listen to it. And I had a friend named Kevin Washington, amazing musician from Minneapolis. I've never heard anyone before who could listen to anything and zero in on the thing about it that he liked, and then celebrate that. Just like this sort of positivity, and like incredibly, like in terms of like critical judgment, faculty, musically, he has all of those things, but he just chooses to think about like the beauty of like expression and the effort. Like he could see people trying and he would lock into that. And it was just a thing that I don't do that naturally, but I've always been inspired by his capacity to really always look for like, what is the thing in this thing that's a gift to you right now, and sit with that, you know.
Thank you.
Thanks for your questions, everyone. I believe that folks can contact you through your website. Is that right, Walter? There's an info address there?
Yes, there is. And I'll actually, I'll give you the email right now.
Okay, great.
So it's basically my name. If everyone can see that in the chat, just my name, Walter at Kitundu.com. That should come through. And if you have any issues, you can also go to Kitundu.com, and there's a little form you can fill out if there's anything that I didn't really get to today and you want to talk about it more. Yeah, feel free. I'm at home.
We're all at home.
Yeah.
Well, I want to be respectful of your time, Walter. So thank you so much for being here again with us, for sharing all of the older work, the in-process work, the future work. What a great span of interesting and engaging and inspirational practices. Think through for all of us artists and art fans. And I do want to remind people that there are a few other events coming up during this residency. The graduation. I see Alex, maybe not, he's still here, but Alex's graduation.
I'm here.
Oh, you're here. Oh, I see you. Okay, sorry, my screen. Great. And then we also have Midway Open House, and we have one more visiting artist talk, Cade Twist, which all of you should come back for sure. So just a reminder, and We also have post this lecture, Karen and Megan have organized, what are you calling it? The Ghosts of Cohorts Past. So it's, don't let it intimidate you, current students. They're very nice people. A little nuts, but that's, you know, how we like them. Look at this. How could you be intimidated by this face, Karen?
How could you be scared of me?
I don't know.
I mean, I understand that people could be scared of me, but like intimidated, no. But like open to everybody, anybody, stay for 5 minutes, stay for 6 years, you know.
Right, friends of the program, current students, current faculty, old faculty, come on down to the Zoom. Karen, are you you put that in the chat, I believe.
I did, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and if people need it again, I can reshare it. Wait a minute. Boo, boo, boo.
And otherwise, yeah, just can't say thank you enough, Walter. I miss you and I'm so grateful that you were with us tonight.
Well, I miss you all too. Yeah, thanks for this invitation. It does feel really nice to be in like connected in conversation with people. And I have part of myself that is really happy to not go outside. You know, that's being tested. Of course, that's being tested. But like I put in the chat, like now being in conversation with all of you again, it does make me miss people again. It does make me want to, you know, get through this and get to a point where we can all be together and have these conversations, you know, over the lunch and dinner table and in the fields and in the classrooms again.
I wouldn't go outside in Chicago either.
Yeah.
It's fine. As long as as long as you're prepared for it. Yeah, as long as you're prepared for it, it's okay. Yeah, you just can't have hope that you're going to be warm. And so once you lose the hope, it's fine.
There's a lesson in there.
Yeah. Extra spark. Say goodbye and thank you.
Yeah,
That's a weird. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say it's lovely to listen to you again and have you here with us. It's great.
Thanks so much, Russell.
We'll jump on over to Karen's Zoom link if you dare. And everyone else, thanks again so much. And we'll hopefully see you again for the rest of the talks. Those of you who aren't required to be here for the rest of the residency and events. So thanks again. And goodbye. I'm gonna say goodbye.
Bye.
Say thanks.
Bye.
Bye.